Morning and welcome to Daily Tanya. Today is Friday, the 27th day of Sivan. Let's begin with tzedakah. Today, tzedakah shemekareves es hageula. And today we will finish chapter 8 in Shar, Yichud, VeAmuna. Yesterday we spoke about the absolute oneness of God. And we mentioned why Hashem is called the Holy One, Kudsha Brichu, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. Because holy means separated, elevated. Everything is completely one with Hashem. It's way beyond. His wisdom is not our wisdom. His emotions is not our emotions. The Alter Rebbe now goes on to explain this further, using the understanding of the human makeup, understanding the different steps that there is between, starting from where do we begin? Where does a person begin? The makeup of a person coming from the soul. Anything that you do is a process that basically is, you can explain this in a 5-step process. Whatever you do begins with wisdom. Wisdom is the intellect, where wisdom is the beginning of the intellect, a flash of wisdom, which develops into empathy, meaning the wisdom, you understand something, let's say. You understand about a certain situation or a certain person. You think about what this person is. And then you develop, wisdom has the bina, chachma, bina, and das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Knowledge means more of a connection to it, which is what we say, the empathy. You empathize with something, meaning that you connect to it. Then after the wisdom, step number 2 is the emotive attributes. Whatever you understand, it develops a feeling, either a positive feeling or a negative feeling. You like it, you dislike it. And then when you have the feeling, this leads to start thinking about this. I have a feeling about something. Now, that feeling, which is a very general one, you start thinking about it. I like this person. And that thought leads then to words, and the words leads to action. So you have the intellect, the wisdom, everything begins with the wisdom. You have the wisdom that leads to emotions. Then it leads to the thought, thinking. Then you have speech. And then you have the action. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain this why. And this explains this to understand there is the distance between action and wisdom is a very, very vast distance, meaning how much of your soul is invested in the wisdom compared to how much of your soul is invested in the action. The action is not, action sometimes may take a lot of energy to do, and it's not easy, but how much of yourself is invested in that? Not as much. A big difference between the action and the speech. Action, sometimes you're doing without even having anything invested, you can act like that. Speech represents inside of you. The thought even more. Emotions is even more, and intellect is even more. And all of these 5 steps, Alter Rebbe will explain in tomorrow's class how all of this, by Hashem, the wisdom and the action are all one. It's like the same one and the same. So this is all to explain the greatness of the holiness of Hashem, how Hashem is in a much, much higher level than anything we can imagine. Let's see inside what the Alter Rebbe says. The Alter Rebbe. Ki amaylo madrega orishona eitzel hanivroim hi hachachma. The supreme quality and rank with regard to created beings is wisdom. Shelachein nikris reishis, for which reason it is called the beginning. As in the phrase, the beginning of wisdom. Reishis chachma. Find something else very interesting that Targum Yonason says in the very first verse in the Torah that says, Bereishis bara Elokim. In the beginning God created. The Targum Yonason ben Uziel, he translates this with wisdom God created. So Bereishis with Reishis means with wisdom. So wisdom is the beginning of everything. So it's not just the beginning of the human being. It is the beginning of an entire creation, even the spiritual world. There's all those attributes begins with wisdom. For it is indeed the beginning and fountainhead of all the life force in creatures. The word Reishis, the beginning, also comes from the word Rosh. Rosh means the head, the fountainhead. So that this is the source and the energy that comes from the wisdom. There is a cause and effect that creates and leads to the next steps. The emotions are a result of the wisdom. Because from wisdom are derived understanding and knowledge. This we explained in the first part of the Tanya, the three parts of the intellect. Like we said, the wisdom is like the idea that comes into a person, an idea that's not something that you achieved on your own, but something that you receive, an idea. Then there is the bina, the understanding represents the developing of the idea, the developing process. And das, knowledge means connecting. Umehem nimshacha iskola midei shebenefesh hamaskelas. And from them flow all the emotive attributes of the rational soul, such as love and kindness and mercy and the like. All of these derived from the intellectual attributes. And Alter Rebbe now is going to explain that we see it in reality. You see that a child does not have the knowledge. A child can have sometimes a child who is very smart, could be a prodigy, can be a genius in math, but it could be that same genius is lacking the dat. Dat is the knowledge. That is the understanding, to be able to empathize with something. It's that the fact that you're not the center of the world, to be able to understand something outside of you. So a child, says the Alter Rebbe, children, we find that children are often very angry. They don't get what they want. They're upset. Because that's the center of the world, is themselves. They don't have yet the maturity and the ability to be able to think of something outside of themselves and connect to something outside of themselves. This is the lack of dat. Says the Alter Rebbe, "V'kanire b'chush." This is seen vividly. She'akatan she'ein b'dahas u'bekas tamid ve'achzari. A child having no wisdom, or again, we're talking about that, the part of the wisdom, part of the knowledge, the connecting, maturity of having the knowledge. So he is always angry and unkind. And also, his love is for trivial things, which are unworthy of being loved. Or for a child, an infant, or a toddler, give him an option to give him an ice cream or $100 bills. Chances are he'll pick the ice cream. Sometimes we make the same mistake. We pick things that, based on our feeling, our understanding, which is compared to the real thing, what really is important to love. We love trivial things. Compared to connecting with Hashem, we love to have a good time, to go to a nice restaurant. Nothing wrong with that. But the more you develop maturity, the more you develop the understanding, the deeper things, you're able to develop feelings to the better things. That is what a child is. A child that he's not mature, is not developed, is empathy, is connecting to something outside of himself, the dot, the knowledge, the connection, that is something that is not developed by him or her. And therefore, he's going to love things which are trivial. Because he lacks the understanding to love things which are worthy of love. For love varies with the level of one's understanding. Thus, the emotions are dependent on the intellect and understanding, inasmuch as they derive from them. So the emotions actually derive from the intellect. Then once you have the emotion, from the emotive attributes of the soul, words and letters of thought issue forth. The emotion leads to start thinking, and the thinking is you're thinking about things that you love or things that you don't. Any kind of thoughts you're thinking all day long, but any thoughts also, it comes from a certain emotion that you have a desire, you have an emotion to certain things, and you think about it. For the soul thinks of that which it loves, or how to perform deeds of kindness and mercy. And so it is with other emotive attributes. They all serve as a source for the words and letters of thought. Within every thought in the world, there is clothed some emotive attribute that causes one to think that thought. And this attribute is the vivifying force of that thought. So again, it's a cause and effect. The emotive attributes affect. These are the cause to the thoughts, the words that you think. And then the same thing is the next step, from thoughts to speech. From the letters of man's thought proceed the letters of his speech. And the letters of thought, are their actual vivifying force. So the letters of the thought are the cause to the letters of speech. And speech in turns gives rise to action, such as actions of charity and kindness, as as in the case of a king who orders his servant to give charity. Meaning his speech causes his charitable thought to result in action. And that is true, says the Alter Rebbe, not only when you need to speak, to give, to do something, even when you do it yourself, you think, the thinking is a general thing. You have speech, the kind of speech within yourself before it leads to action. So you say to yourself, I'm going now to the store and buy something that I like. And even when a man himself does something which he had thought of doing. In this instance, when no speech is involved, his thought leads directly to action. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe goes on to say that here too, in order for the life force to descend from thought to action, it must pass through the intermediary stage, which resembles speech. So even though you're not actually saying it, but there is the stage from the thought to action that resembles the concept of speech. So he says, "Arikoyach hanefesh v'chayusa, amislabish ba'asiyazu, u'ka'ayin mamish legabe koyach hanefesh v'chayusa, amislabish b'dibur adam." Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain how much of your soul energy, the power of your soul, is invested in the action compared to what is invested in the speech. And it goes from the bottom up. But all these 5 steps, in the action, there is the least amount of energy that is invested from the power of your soul. And the same thing is speech, and further in the thoughts and in emotions and the wisdom. That's what Alter Rebbe continues. Koyach hanefesh v'chayusa mislabesh ba'asiya zu, u'ke'ayin mamesh legabe koyach hanefesh v'chayusa mislabesh b'dibur adam. The power of the soul and its life force, which clothed itself in this deed, is as absolute nothingness in relation to the power of the soul and its life force, which clothed itself in speech of man. They are to each other as the relation in comparison of the body and soul. It says, to the same degree is there no comparison between the power of the soul and its life force, which clothed itself in the speech of man, and the power of the soul and its life force, which clothed itself in man's action. Therefore, when this power and life force has descended so far that it is able to clothe itself in action, it had already undergone contractions and condensations which are far below the power of speech. So that's the point Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out, that all the energy that comes from the soul itself, going through these 5 steps, there is vast contractions and reductions, and it's not compared at all, the part that is in the action to the part that is in the speech, and so and further on. Likewise, like the distance of body from soul is the relation of the letters of speech to the letters of thought. Meaning that there is a vast distance, uncomparable distance of the soul energy that is in speech compared to the soul energy that it is in thought. Speech is already to the outside, thought, you thinking within you. Likewise is the relation of the letters of thought to the essence and of the emotive attribute which is clothed in it and animates it. that emotive attribute animates the thought. So the energy, the soul energy in the emotive attribute is certainly great, so much greater, not to be compared to the energy that is in the thought. So the thought that derives from the emotion is in no way comparable to the emotion itself. And going up to the next step, from the emotions to the intellect. וכן ערך מוס עמידה לגבי החוכמה ובינה ודס שכללוסנו השכל שממנו נמשך המידה זו. And likewise, the relation of the essence and life force of the emotive attribute in comparison with the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge which together constitute the intellect from which this attribute was derived. So the attribute, the emotive attribute, is derived from the intellect. So the power of the soul that is in the intellect is way much greater than that which is in the emotion. The Alter Rebbe goes on to say that this is true in the human soul, but this is true not only in human soul. Those 5 steps is true in all the entire creation, both physical and spiritual. The higher world and the lower world, they all have these steps. All this applies to the soul of man and the soul of all the created beings. In all their higher and lower worlds, in all of them, wisdom is the beginning and source of the life force. So the chachma, the wisdom, is the beginning of everything. So God, however, as will soon be concluded, is as distant from the degree of wisdom as he is from that of action. From the divine perspective, action and wisdom are humble equals. They're equally humble. So this is the end of this chapter, chapter 8. The next chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to continue to explain this, what we just explained, these 5 steps, and how distant is everything is nullified to each other, their cause and effect, and the wisdom is the beginning. And by Hashem is the wisdom and action all the same. So this gives us the perspective to understand as much as possible of understanding godliness, understanding what he is not, what Hashem is not. The more we understand, the higher and the purer is our faith. That's what we say. We said Emunah Tahir, we said pure faith. Pure faith means when you exhaust everything what you can understand, you reach to the level of pure faith. So, wishing you all a good Shabbos. This Shabbos is Chav Ches Sivan, and is the day the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin was saved from Nazi Europe. And they came here to America in 1941. It is also the Shabbos we blessed in the month of Tammuz. And on Thursday, we're going to have the holy day, Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd day of Tammuz, the Rebbe's holy day. That is the day that physically we couldn't see the Rebbe no longer. But we know the Rebbe is with us, even more so. And very soon we should be able to see the Rebbe physically with the coming of Mashiach. Have a wonderful day and a good Shabbos.